My name is Jeremy Walton, and this is the Cinematography of SALTBURN. Let's go! I try and watch as many films as I can, whether they're good, bad, controversial, independent, or studio-backed. Whatever. There's always something I can take away as a filmmaker. One film creating buzz is the 2023 film SALTBURN, directed by Emerald Fennell and cinematography by Linus Sandgren. The acting, the storyline, certain scenes, you know the ones I'm talking about, all have their spot to shine, but the cinematography really stood out, so let's dive into the details. On IMDb, we see that they shot on film, so let's start there and find out what were the choices they made for film, lenses, and format. Sandgren loves the process of shooting on film. He says it adds something to the image at times he can't predict, but the result with colors and contrast comes out beautiful, even on a gray day. I want to have the ability to choose whatever format feels like it tells the story the best way, and oftentimes for me it's usually one of the film formats that I prefer. Now for the budget, as of now there's only speculation, but people are guessing between 10 and 30 million. A large portion went to actors and most likely the location, but what does that get you for film? To me, 16mm would have been too naturalistic and too close to human emotions. Shooting 35mm with its finer grain would allow us to heighten the luxurious elements of the set and costume design, while framing and lighting would bring us uncanny, unsettling emotional detachment. When watching this, there was a unique quality to the image. I was debating if it was digital or film, but there's so much you can do nowadays that I think it can be challenging to tell if done right. I think there's so much influence, like how would a smaller indie film afford to shoot on film? Time restraints, how the movie is actually being filmed, like using drones, or is it a mix of film and digital? Whether it's a subconscious thing, I feel we all have these internal thoughts when watching a film and determining the format. SALTBURN is almost an impression of reality, but it isn't reality, so it helps to shoot on film, because digital can feel more real, so you'd need to work against that with lighting, filtering, or adding grain in post. Now, it may not be intentional, but I feel when people shoot digital, they talk more about the lenses, so it was refreshing to have Sandgren go into detail about their lens choices. He chose the Panavision Primos, which he loved out of all the lenses he tested. It's also a lens he's used on other films, and knew he could control the spectacular aesthetic the lenses provided. The funky aberrations added to the impression of reality they were going for with little flaring. In combination with 35mm film, they gave exactly that juicy richness I envisioned. We had the full range at our disposal. We used the 10mm for wides, but close-ups could vary between 35mm, 40mm, 85mm, or up to 100mm, depending on how we needed to tell a story at a particular moment. All this visual language comes through in the film, and they didn't stop there. I'm sure you've noticed the aspect ratio of 1:3:3:1 or 4:3. Kind of hard to miss. We have seen this before in other recent films, but to me it's always about why they chose to do it that matters. Emerald was obsessed with seeing lots of details and close-ups of sweat, armpits, hair, and eyes, and we also felt that the 1:3:3 would benefit that. Then, comparing different aspect ratios, it has a slightly more comical feel to it. There were some funny moments for sure, and some close-up shots that were memorable. There was also a sense of claustrophobia and tension they wanted to create. Seeing those black bars on the sides of the frame instantly makes me feel uncomfortable. But that's the point. The other thing they considered was the house. An epic house full of square rooms, tall ceilings, and a widescreen format would be cropping that environment, which was almost another character in the film. This reminds me of the film The Favorite, which took place in an epic castle, and they filmed in a 1:5:1 aspect ratio, which is very close to 16:9. They needed the height, but they chose to use lenses like a 6mm fisheye. They wanted you to see everything. Doing that let the audience feel the characters were almost imprisoned by the location. A claustrophobic feeling. Well, that sounds familiar. They also shot on film. I felt attracted to the idea that we could depict the Cattons in a similar way to how their family has been depicted over hundreds of years in their paintings. That's more square too, rather than CinemaScope. In my research, paintings come up a lot. Actually, in almost all my research for YouTube videos like this, filmmakers constantly reference paintings. My last video about the film Ferrari, they mentioned Caravaggio and how he influenced their lighting, and now we have Saltburn, and what do you think they had to say? We were attracted by Baroque painters like Caravaggio. They have that dramatic light coming through the windows. So we thought of creating expressive imagery where the house was also this object that hides secrets. I wanted to mention that because here we have two very different films referencing some of the same paintings, and look at the difference in the end result. To me, I love that. It shows how one thing can take on different meanings or be viewed in a new way. At times, I think some of this stuff gets overlooked or at least not talked about enough. So if you're wondering, this is why I bring it up over and over again and why I'll keep doing it. Even Sandgren does his own homework and has his own take on the process. I like to create mood boards that are much more light specific than other departments usually do. I want people to look at the mood boards as one image from a distance looking at the whole. As a whole, this is the feel. They wanted the entire crew to be on the same page and to be thinking like painters. This was a collaboration, and everyone came up with their own ideas to make the film better. It was about creating suspense in different ways that the audience wanted to watch. From the visual descriptions Emerald had written into her script, which you could say were disturbing, but in a good way, I saw it as a kind of gothic vampire story, but not one that descends into the tropes and stereotypes you would normally associate with those sorts of movies. Now let's get into the lighting and shots of Saltburn. I know I specifically talk about certain details, but like Sandgren said about his mood boards, as a whole, this is the feel. So don't forget film stock, aspect ratio, locations, wardrobe, all this stuff combined with the shots and lighting gives a feeling. Maybe the shot alone isn't enough. When it comes to some of the more disturbing scenes and they used a more seductive dramatic lighting, it created this contrast and awkward feeling. They asked themselves, how can we make something disgusting and attractive at the same time? If you haven't watched the film yet, this is something you'll understand very quickly when you see it, but it's also something that was done really well. It wasn't by accident. Sometimes we wanted to step back and do more of a composed shot, and then the actors had to act within the frame. In other films, it could be nice for the actors to have the freedom to do whatever and move around. But in this, everyone was on the same page to accommodate the composition over what felt perhaps more natural for an actor. There are two scenes I want to talk about. One is the graveyard scene. Based on what we talked about, I think it's a good example of these decisions they made on how they wanted to shoot the film. This was a shot at a distance, and like Sandgren mentioned, even on a gray day, things can be beautiful when shot on film. This was one of those moments when you might want to look away, but it pulls you in. Usually the camera would cut to a close-up, but this doesn't. We stay at a distance. What does that remind you of? What do we view at a distance and decide how we feel or think? A painting. The other scene is the ending. There is a lot of technical aspects to filming someone dancing throughout the home. There's timing, rehearsals, lens choices, and the lighting. They used something they called heightened lighting when they had light pouring in through the windows, almost like a spotlight, like he was on a stage, which makes total sense for what the end shot was trying to portray. He's the king of the castle and it's a liberating situation. You want to just feel him own it. It's all in Barry's performance, and what we thought of for the camera was we want to see him in his castle. The ending shot of Saltburn reminded me of the ending shot to Michael Clayton. Unique, interesting, made a statement. You want both of these characters to win, or we're rooting for them even in a strange way, and both were done in one continuous shot. I saw Michael Clayton almost 20 years ago and instantly thought of that scene when watching Saltburn. I thought this was interesting because lately I've been watching movies and some are very entertaining, not necessarily a bad movie, but when I turn that TV off, that movie is gone. I never think about it again. Then you have the films I've mentioned that stay with you. Saltburn stays with you. It took a risk. Barry Keoghan took a risk. And we all know taking a risk can be scary, but that's the exciting part of filmmaking. Let's keep taking risks. I'll leave you with this. It's always fun to do different things. Well, there you have it, the cinematography of Saltburn. Hope you enjoyed the video. Hit that like button because there's definitely more on the way. Subscribe so you don't miss out. Leave a comment if you have questions. Until next time, it's a wrap.